In a traditional housing market, housing values go up about 3 to 5% per year. In 2020 to 2021, they were going up between 10 to 20% every 3 months. At this point, it's been beaten to death how crazy the housing market has been, how insane housing values went up, and now it seems like they're beginning to go down. But how overvalued are housing prices, really? Today, we're going to do a deep dive into the data to better understand what happened, and more importantly, figure out what would have happened if the COVID bubble never happened. What would happen if we would just continued to stay at the path we are? But more importantly, we're also going to talk about something that a lot of people really don't ever talk about, and it's about the fact that we were already in a bubble that was beginning to pop before the COVID bubble even happened. So let's dive in. First and foremost, all the data that we're going to be using in today's video is taken from the Fred Economic Research St. Louis Fed. Here is the website that's in question. You can find this website by going to fred.stlouisfed.org/series/MSPUS. And essentially for this data, all I simply did is hit download and I grabbed it into an Excel sheet. The reason why we're looking at the median sales price is historically looking at the median sales price has always been a good indicator of where that middle line of housing values are. If we do the average, I feel like the really excessive $1 million houses kind of taint that data. So we're just going to use this to get a good feel for the housing values. According to this, which I find very accurate, right now the median price range is $416,000, which if you're looking in major metro areas like Phoenix, not crazy ones like California or anything like that, but normal metro areas, that's about the price you need to pay for a somewhat decent house. So to give you a quick synopsis of why the houses went crazy, let's look at this data and really boil down here. So whatever was going on with the housing market completely just went out the water at this point here. This was like really the point where things went insane. And we saw this massive increase here. And just to make it very bluntly, there's two main factors why this happened. We're going to very, very much simplify this. Number one is a lot of people wanted to buy a house. If you were looking for a $400,000 house in 2019, well, because the interest rates were so much cheaper, you could actually, for the same monthly payment, now get a $500,000 house. So this brought a lot of people out of the woodwork. And not only that, but there was a huge rush of investor buyers coming in to try to eat up as much property as possible, because there's a lot of people making a lot of money here. You could literally buy 10 houses here, sell it, at this point and make a ton of money. And people thought that was going to last forever. And it was just a massive effect. So you combine this already crazy effect with the second reason, which is sellers were not selling. Inventory was at an all-time low. Right now, inventory in Arizona is like 12 to 13,000. Normally, it's like 15 to 20,000. During the COVID days, it was as low as 3 to 4,000. Like there was almost no inventory for sale. So if you combine the crazy rabid hunger that buyers had versus the complete hesitancy the homeowners had to sell their house in the market, it created the perfect storm of this housing value increase. So that's very simply what happened. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to talk about what would have happened if this housing bubble just never happened. What would have happened if housing values just continued to go up? Now we're going to get a little nerdy here, so apologies in advance. I'll try my absolute best to go through this as simply as possible. So basically the first thing I did is we got all the data that we got from Fred here, and it looks like they take it every quarter. So we have a data set starting in 1963, basically every January, April, July, and October. So every 3 to 4 months, they give us an idea of what that value is. So the first thing I did is I figured out what that quarterly adjustment is. And as you can see here, very commonly, the quarterly ever exceeds the double digits. There's sometimes they would go to 7 or 8%. I did this chart here, which I found very helpful. It was a combination of the price range one that we see here with the basically adjustments that were happening quarter to quarter. We can see here like there's certain points in history when there is massive increase. So like in 1972, there was a 20% increase in value, and I started this in it looks like 1987, another increase of value. So we have about like what, every 10, 15 years ish, there's always like this increase of value going on. Now, of course, we'd have to dive deep down into the history, or maybe someone will tell us in the comment section what was going on in those years. But we can see there's always been these high points. There's always also been low points. And surprisingly enough, the low points always either occur right before or right after a huge increase. But I'm sure historically there's always a reason why recessions were happening or something was going on that was causing this. The big increase that we see here is the 2004 increase, which a lot of people talk about the massive housing crash and bubble crash that happened, but really they did not go up as high. Like 15% is the top here. It didn't increase at a rapid rate as we just experienced now, which is very terrifying. At least when I think about it, I think about how terrifying it was. But if you look at it on a data chart, it really isn't that spooky. We see here, once again, it was just a little bubble and then a little pop. But the way it's described is like it was like such a massive, horrendous thing. But when you look at it on the data set, it just looks like a little zip. Not downplaying the effects of it. I'm sure it was really terrible, but it's just interesting seeing that on the data. So then what I did as well is essentially I figured out the change on a yearly. So basically this number indicates the past 4 quarters. So it's just a little easier for me to kind of visualize what the year by percentage change is. So for example, in 1966, this number here, it was a 5.5 increase from a year ago, which we literally just go to 21,000, and that literally is a 5% increase. And it's so interesting because that when housing prices were like at 25,000, like 5% was only like 1,000, or like a very small chunk. And now we're looking at 5% with such big numbers. But anyways, I got this and I went all the way down the rail to kind of figure out what's going on here. And of course it ends here. And this is where I got those numbers that I was telling you in the beginning of the video. So we can see here 2017 to 2019, there's a lot of negatives here, surprisingly, which we'll talk about in a bit, but we can really determine that that last normal-ish month was surprisingly still in 2020. We only start seeing the double-digit months in 2021, but it looks like that first half of the year, the second half of 2020, so like the pandemic started middle of the year, and then towards the end of the year, people were starting to adjust. It really wasn't that much massive price changes right away. Well, of course, the massive price changes happened after the fact, 2020, 2021, 2022, and of course, now we're starting to see those reductions. So just want to kind of break down how I broke down that data. Now that we have a better understanding of that, like I said, let's figure out what were to happen if the COVID bubble never happened. Well, normally, based on the historical data, a house values per year increased about 3 to 5%. And if you look at the optimistic data, which basically what I did is I kept all the numbers the same, but right at that last normal month, which I consider to be, I think, the last month of 2019, around there, I essentially deleted all those numbers. And what I did is I just did a simple adjustment of about, on average, 5%, then 4%, then 3%. So like those 3 numbers. Now, as you can tell, they don't just grow that flatly. There's always like during the summer months, there's an increase. During the winter months, there's a decrease. So they kind of average out, but they add up to 5. So a 5% increase in 2020, 4% increase in 2021, 3% in 2023, et cetera, et cetera. So I built that hypothetical scenario and I put it into a graph sheet. And this is what it gave me. So essentially, if the COVID bubble never happened and we were just to continue to increase to the 3 to 5% range, this is how it would look like. To me, honestly, I was a little surprised seeing this. This doesn't look very natural to me. This looks kind of spooky to me. It looks like it's a little too high, in my opinion, and it's really avoiding the very, I don't know if you guys noticed it at this point, but a very obvious fact that this little bubble that was happening here is just being completely ignored. So I wanted to first talk about this one because this is a lot of point that a lot of agents make. Houses go on average 3 to 5%. If things were to continue to be normal, houses go up 3 to 5% every year. But if you look at this number, 3 to 5% every year does not look natural to me. If anything, this might look a little more natural, and that was in 3 to 5%, but that just doesn't seem like the likely scenario to me. But I wanted to still talk about it. So there's the optimistic route. Essentially, according to the optimistic route, right now, and in the recording this at the end of 2023, the median house price should have been around $382. So to compare them, right now, median housing values are $416,000. So with the COVID bubble, that's where we are now. If we would have had this optimistic approach where prices only increase 3 to 5%, right now, our median housing price should be about $382,931. This is only a $33,069 difference. that is not massive at all. If you really break it down, every $10,000 is about $40 to $60 on your monthly payment. So we're only looking at about a $100 to $200 difference in monthly payment. Now, of course, the interest rate probably wouldn't have gone as high, because the only reason why interest rates are so high now is because they're trying to combat inflation and all this stuff. So who knows where interest rates would have been. But let's say if rates were not 7 or 8%, they were instead like 4 or 5%. So combining that low interest rate with only about a $30,000 price decrease, you're looking at a monthly payment of about $2,274, which is a huge difference of what we currently have right now, which is $416 as a median price, with an interest rate of almost like 8% right now. So of a payment of about $3,100. And of course, I'm using 5% down for each one of those scenarios, just so you know. So massive difference, but really that 30,000 number is not that massive. It's really the interest rate that I feel is affecting us right now the most. So now let's talk about something that's very interesting that's rarely talked about, the pre-bubble. Well, what is a pre-bubble? Well, a lot of people aren't aware. There was a bubble here. Yeah, and we're talking, this is the housing crash of, was it 2005, 2010 area. Like, we know really the housing crash really was just, there was an increase of houses here, and that corrected itself right here. It wasn't that massive adjustment or anything really. It was just putting the housing values back to where it should have been. But if you can clearly see here, there was a bubble starting again in 2011, and it was a long bubble. It was one that continued, but it kind of started flattening out a bit there. And the reason why this bubble was being created was there's a lot of government products being created in the mid-2010s to encourage home ownership. There was a lot of down payment assistance programs. There's a lot of free money programs given out, and they really started slowing this down like 2018 to 2017, because I remember everybody would use FHA 3.5% down. They would use like a home in 5 program where they would basically give out, you pay your home down payment, pay part of the closing costs, and it was almost the same interest rate to get both. It was insane. I remember the day when they came out and they announced that interest rates were going to be super incredibly higher. They're going to be much higher now for those kind of products, and it really knocked it out of the game. I always remember there's a client of mine that was looking to buy, and then their brother literally was calling me a scammer because they just bought a house 4 months ago and they got the best rate in this, that, the other. And I was like, dude, really look at the news. Like it just changed. So they were starting to really take those programs back. Me personally, I also think there was a lot of like crappy situations, like the flipper epidemic. We don't really talk about this a lot here, but you know, like HETV got really popular. These dang flippers started coming out. Everybody and their mom wanted to be a flipper. Everybody wanted to be Joanna Gaines and the Chip Gaines, or whatever his name is. I'm here, am I pretending like I don't know them? Literally, I'm like, I have the fan club. I'm like part of their fan club, and I'm just like, oh, who are they? Anyways, everybody wanted to be a flipper, so there was a lot of wholesalers coming out and trying to take advantage of these people and buy properties really cheap. And there's all this crap that was happening. And if anyone knows in this channel, I hate wholesalers, and flippers aren't bad, I guess, but they are partially also responsible for a lot of houses selling for a lot more and making things out of. Anyways, I digress. So there was a lot of stuff happening here, but that was starting to kind of correct itself. And as it was correcting, boom, the COVID boom happened. It's almost like there was a giant gash in your arm and it started healing. Like, it was dirty for a while. You left it started getting infected. It was terrible, but you finally cleaned the wound. You finally like, okay, finally it's starting to heal. And then out of nowhere, someone comes and just like throws acid on it or just stabs it or something. And it just made the situation way worse. Of course, it made a lot of people money, not only homeowners, but I mean, this is something that I've not talked a lot about, but real estate agents, lenders, and really the real estate business benefited greatly from this because a lot of people were buying and a lot of people became rich. But anyways, a lot of times it's not talked about how it wasn't really given time to heal because of what happened here. Right? That kind of just made things worse. And now as we're starting to heal again, that's what I see. Anytime I see anything going down, I'm seeing it as healing, right? We're going back to where we are. I can't, help but think that if it would have been allowed to heal, it probably would have continued to follow the same trajectory the original bust had, where it would have went back to the point where it should have been. And in my opinion, I think what would have happened if this didn't happen is it would have continued until the point where it should have been here. And then who knows, after that point, it could have continued to go back up. It could have just flattened out. It could have just been in a steady growth. But I like to think it probably would have just been able to continue that path until something adjusted. So let's first figure out what would have been this number here. Like, where should it have been? And for this one, it's a little more complicated, but what I was able to come up with is, and I call it the first bubble, is I found what was the last time things were somewhat normal. And what I discovered is the last time things were somewhat normal were right here, right? That was like that 2009 to like 2011 period. So what I did is I went back to the Excel sheet. I found that period. And at first I was like, okay, where did it start going kind of crazy? And I can see here in 2011, there is that massive 7% increase here. So I'm assuming, okay, well, here is, what would that would be like 10-1. That's when things started going up. So 10/1/2011, and that lines up perfectly, right? So that's where that massive increase is. So I would just say, okay, so this is when the bubble started kind of boosting up, and this is where we start seeing double-digit increases, 13, 8%, 9% increases instead of 1 or 2 or -1 or 2. So I said, okay, from that point on, what happens if we would have just done an annual increase of about 3%, just a very nice, healthy 3%. So what I did is I added, just starting from that number, 3% every year, 3% every year, and just continue to add 3%, 3%. I'm not sure if you can see that, so let me make it a little bigger so you guys can kind of see it. If you guys want, I can make this Excel sheet public. I mean, if you want to just kind of play around with it, just let me know in the comment section. If there's enough of you guys that ask for it, I'll just put it on the description. But anyways, just added 3%, and the chart's not perfect. I mean, it's too perfect, right? There's no like give or anything, but I did an annual number. And I concluded that if it would have been continued, 2021 should have been about 311 for the median price. 2022 should have been about 320. So using this, I got all the numbers again, and this is the red is what happened. This is the actual true numbers. So starting from the point of like with the last normal number, which was like mid 2020, I said, well, let's see. What probably would have happened is it still would have had time to correct. So if you remember here, we were right here when things started going up for the COVID. This right here, there was going to be still a decrease. It was probably going to take maybe a year to a year and a half of a decrease still. I'm predicting about year and a half. So what I did here is I just showed a steady decline here. -3, -1, increased it a little bit for a little bit, -1, -2. So just kind of show a gradual decline. And then once we're in 2021, and if you remember in 2021, we should have been around 311. Once we got to that 311, 310 mark, which we were here, then I started kind of slightly increasing it year by year, about 3%. So if I haven't lost you, let me just show you the data here. So I kind of corrected the bubble, right? Made things back to normal, and then slowly started kind of getting back to that average market. So there is a possibility that the bubble would have gotten us down even further. There is a possibility that it would have just gone crazy. Who knows, right? But I like to be optimistic and think, well, I think the bubble would have corrected to the point just like it did here. Probably could have gone lower, but I'm just kind of shooting that, doing my best to keep it about a 3% increase. Looking at it now, is probably should have been a little bit under, but anyways, I digress. So what should have been the median price value? Well, according to this, the median price should have been currently right now where we're at $330. In summary, right now we are $416,000 for median value. If we did the optimistic route, we were $382,000, which is about $33,069 difference. And if we took in the realistic, where we allowed the first bubble to pop, allowed the market to heal, and have it continue to go up, then we should have been around $330,000, and that is being still optimistic. As I showed you, it probably should have gone lower, but I'm still kind of just being hopeful and said, hey, it wouldn't have popped as much. It would have just, gone to a point. So that could have easily been 300. It could have been easily 285, but we're just doing 330. So that is a difference of about $86,000. So to answer the question here, based on the numbers I'm running, we're still about $86,000 overvalued. And once again, you could be more aggressive and say, well, Javier, I think it should have been 100,000 or 120. So let's just give it a range between $86,000 to about maybe $120,000 overpriced still. So now's the depressing part. How would that monthly payment have looked? So let's go to 330. Once again, who knows what the interest rates would have been, but let's just assume there's been like around 5%. There we are, about under $2,000 monthly payment. And as we've talked about in my other videos about affordability, this basically matches up where the median annual income is right now for most families. If a payment for a $330,000 house would have been about $2,000, then a lot of people could still afford a home right now. A lot of people will probably even not be watching this. Who knows? The housing market crash, people would have never existed, and we would have been in utopia. This is all wishful thinking. I mean, I'm saying that things need to decrease 80,000 to 100,000 to get back to normal, but that doesn't account for a lot of things. It doesn't account for the billions, trillions. Yeah, 5.2 trillion in COVID relief, 4.5 in QE, 2 trillion. So we have about $13 trillion in new money. Yeah. So it doesn't account for the $13 trillion that were created in the market. Us saying, oh, you know, it should still have another 80 to 120,000 to decrease. It could, or it could go even lower, because we're in a current market where the government is aggressively fighting inflation, honestly, fighting, I think, home ownership. Like, I don't think they want people to buy houses right now, which is why rates are so freaking high. Yet people are still doing it. Or, and you hate hearing this, but it could also not drop 80 to 120K. It could maybe still stay somewhat up there. We could just be permanently inflated for a while. Because once again, there's still a lot of people buying houses right now. There's still a lot of corporations buying houses right now for the purpose of renting it. So it's wishful thinking to think, oh yeah, no, this is where we should have been, would have been there. There's a lot of consequences that were created because of what happened and what we all went through. Not only the trillions of dollars that were created, but man, the emotional and all the traumas that were created, right? The financial habits, everything. It's really hard to just boil down and say this is how much things are overvalued, because it doesn't include the whole picture. But if you want it wrapped up in a nice pretty bow, we're still about $80,000 to about $120,000 overvalued if things were to have stayed normal. I wish you the absolute best in accomplishing your home goals. I'll see you guys in the next video.